Let me tell you the story of Pallas Athena. And I want to talk quite a bit about her because you don't hear much about Athena when you associate with the sign of Libra, because what you always hear about is Venus and how beautiful she was and how she loved adornments. And in a lot of ways, when you really think about Venus, she was sort of lazy. She was really always into pleasure. She wasn't doing much of anything else. Athena is a very different horse of a very different color. Athena is the daughter of Zeus. And she's birthed out of his mind, not his body. And to give you a little background on her, Athena, her mother was Metis, and Metis, Metis, was considered to be the wisest woman in Greece. And her mother and Zeus were, of course, involved. And Zeus was rather threatened by her mother. And, of course, this is mythology, and in mythology, you always have a long, long leash as far as reality perspectives. And because he was threatened by this wise woman, he devoured her, and immediately upon devouring her, he began to develop this abhorrent headache. And suddenly, quite suddenly, out of the top of his head, flew out and bounced out the goddess Athena, fully clothed in her armor, her sword, and her war shield with a war cry. And if you notice the story, she came out of his mind, not his body. And in fact, the sign of Libra is associated very much with the mind, the higher mind, the ability to put thoughts together, to coordinate thoughts. Now, before we talk any more about Athena, let's look at her history. Let's look at that whole family tree without getting too involved in the fact that each time one of these gods or goddesses springs out of the body of the parent before them, another development happens in the civilization. If we go right back to the beginning of time, Uranus, who is the Lord and the god of chaos, is the first god. And out of his existence comes many children, one of which is Kronos or Saturn, who ultimately killed his father in order to bring order into the society. Order, justice, the status quo, a balance, a foundation. After Saturn or Kronos, there was a major, major battle, and after him came Zeus or Jupiter, who was the god of education, philosophy, and the higher mind. Now we're at the point in the story, or the point in the family tree, literally, where we're seeing Athena, who's very representational of Venus or social consciousness, coming out of education and philosophy. So she's now at a position, and the society's at a position where they have enough education, enough philosophy, they've figured out how to put things together, where they're looking at the bigger picture. And of course, Athena begins to be considered a very respected goddess. She becomes the goddess who, of course, is in charge of Athens and Greece. She is known as the goddess of wisdom, which is very interesting in the fact that her mother Metis was the wisest woman of Greece at the time, and justice. And she becomes a major consultant, which is very interesting because when you see people who have a lot of Libra in their horoscopes, or Libra, especially in the house of career, if they have the sign there, they're very good consultants. They make good attorneys. They gather a lot of ideas, stand back, and put things together. And she became a major consultant for the heroes. She was the goddess of wisdom and justice, and she supported the heroes and their militaristic strategies. And basically, she was rather selective. If she liked their cause, if she believed in their cause, then she would, of course, give them unending good advice, the best advice available. If she did not believe in their cause, she wouldn't even give them the time of day. But if she did, she would give them good advice, and they would always win the battle, and they would always owe her support. And one of the gods one of the people in the ancient stories that she was guiding as she went along and guiding his family was Ulysses. And Ulysses, if you remember the story of the Odyssey of Homer, Ulysses goes off to fight the Trojan Wars, and as a result, he's gone for 20 years. And basically, the story of Ulysses wandering all over the world as he meets all these different women is really the search for the feminine. It's a story about the search for the feminine. And there's different aspects to that story, but one of the aspects that's also associated with Venus, who was the first goddess we talked about, that's in the story of Ulysses, is the goddess Circe, Circe, who was literally an enchantress and who had the ability to seduce. And at one point, she wanted Ulysses and his men to stay with her, and he would not. And she proceeded to turn all his men into pigs And of course, he took action instead of being passive about the pleasure he was experiencing. He took action and said, look, if you don't turn my men back so that I can continue on my journey, I will take over your realm. And of course, at that point, she gained respect for him, brought the men back, and actually helped him strategize, along with advice from Athena, on how to move through the next realms of the Amazons and the Sirens, etc. Somewhere along that story, too, when Athena comes in, because she's in and out of this story, this 20-year Odyssey is literally what it is, she comes upon Ulysses' son, and Ulysses' son is Telemachus. And what's happening back at the ranch is basically everybody thinks Ulysses is dead. Penelope, Ulysses' wife, is faithfully weaving a tapestry during the day, and the idea being that when the tapestry is finished, one of the many, many suitors that has arrived to marry her will be able to marry her, but she believes that Ulysses is still alive. So by night, she unweaves the tapestry, and it's very interesting if you bring the idea of tapestry in here, because one of the crafts that Athena was responsible for is that she was also considered not only to be a wonderful consultant and a person who could help the heroes and help them with their strategies, but she was a master weaver. She was considered, in fact, to be the master weaver in Greece and a master artisan, and in fact was very much a mentor for artisans and craftspeople in the ancient times. And it's Penelope, who is Ulysses' wife, that's very much in debt to her and is doing this weaving. And what's happening is Ulysses' son has grown up at this point, Telemachus, and he doesn't have the faith that his mother does, and he believes that, in fact, one of those men that's waiting is going to marry his mother. And so he's out and about being very irresponsible one day, and out of the blue comes Athena dressed as an old man, and dressed in an old cloak, burlap. Her face is covered in a low voice, and Telemachus is doing whatever he's doing, and she comes upon him and she says, you know, your father's not dead. And Telemachus doesn't believe it. He thinks, she's just it's the rantings of an old man. And she says, no, your father's not dead. What your job to do right now, I believe, is to go back and put your life in order and get your house in order and grow up and take some responsibility to help your mother as he comes home. And just as he's leaving with this advice, he turns to Athena and he says, what is your name, old man? And Athena says, my name is Mentor. And mentors are very much associated with the sign of Libra. In fact, especially as they grow older, as they mature into past middle adulthood, one of their greatest gifts that they can give back is the fact that they are very good teachers and they can act as mentors to other people because they have been there and they have had the experience. There's a shadow side to Athena, too, though. Athena is not always the goddess of wisdom and fairness and justice and militaristic action. She also has kind of a dark side, and I think this is kind of the shadow of the pleasurable side of Libra that we don't see. If you look at the pictures or the statues of Athena, she has a shield. And on her shield, you always see the snake-headed Medusa, who, in fact, was turned into a snake-headed Medusa because she was caught in the temple of Athena making love with her lover. And Athena was so outraged that this should occur that she just, without thinking, sent Perseus upon her to kill her. And as a result, her head ended up on her shield. Now, when we talk about balance, we talk about the achieving balance. We talk about the stories of Venus, Aphrodite, who's only into pleasure, and then we look at Athena, who is not really thinking of the body at all. She's really in her mind. What did we say in the very beginning of this talk? That this is part of the struggle for Libra, is trying to achieve body, emotional, and spiritual integration. And the unfortunate thing, the difficult thing, is allowing the Athena in all of us, both men and women, to come in to know when to take action, to know when to say no, to know when to set limits, to know when to not be passive, to know when to make decisions. Because if you read about Libra, you always hear about they can't make up their minds, they sit on the fence. Sometimes you even read terrible things like they're lazy. And it's really not any of that at all. What it's about is they haven't integrated the war side, the strategy side. And really one of the great gifts, and this is part of inviting the shadow in, that a Libra has, is that they can be master strategists, very much like Athena, who was the goddess of wisdom and justice. There's one more short story or short mythology that goes with Libra. And the goddess that we're talking about here, of course, is the ultimate goddess, the goddess Hera, Hera, or in the Roman version, she was Juno, who was married to Zeus. She was actually the only legal wife that Zeus had, even though he had many consorts throughout the kingdom. And regardless of what happens in all the stories about Hera and Zeus, they are legally married, and she is very committed to this marriage, the sacred marriage. Libra is about sacred marriage, and in Greek it's called hieros gamos. And when a Libra personality or a Libra person decides to commit to a relationship, generally speaking, it's considered to be a lifetime commitment. This is why when the betrayal issues come up, it can be such a deep tear for them, because it's not something that's in the agenda at all, since one of their basic premises is that they believe in sacred marriage and that they believe in the holiness of union. And in fact, one of the things they do have to learn to work with and live with in life is to not always feel that they have to be in a marriage or relationship. And this is a thing you will see too about people who have a lot of Libra. There will be many relationships, many marriages, because they can't see going it alone. And part of why those relationships and marriages don't work is because they have not integrated the action side in. Once the action side is integrated, they don't really need marriage, but they can bring a full person rather than a half person to the marriage. Now let's talk about how a Libra personality will operate and react in different areas of life. Now, the information that I'm about to talk about is probably more appropriately going to be fitting for someone who may have Libra rising, and that would, of course, be determined by the time of day that each individual is born. And it doesn't have to be people born only in the sign of Libra. It can be any time during the year, as long as at the hours of their birth, the constellation of Libra was on the horizon. And this only really can be determined by an astrologer. There are many good books in the marketplace that show you how to do that. But let's kind of go over these different areas. There's 12 basic areas. And of course, we've talked a great deal about the first area, which is basically the ego and the self-expression. Libra presents itself as someone who is very, very gentle. Venus was basically a very gentle goddess. I would like to really mention, though, that she was not weak. And this is the misconception about Libra, that sometimes, because it sometimes appears to be passive, because it sometimes appears to sort of stand on the fence or sit on the fence and not make decisions, that it is weak. This is not a weak sign of the zodiac. This is a very strong sign of the zodiac that simply may take a lot in before it makes decisions. The way a person, particularly as Libra rising, may handle their cash flow and their resources. You know, the sign of Scorpio generally would come up in this portion of the horoscope, which would suggest that they could be very possibly compulsive spenders, because the sign of Scorpio is very passionate and it's very compulsive and it's very addicted, and it's also very much full of life. And so this is a group of people that likes nice things and is willing to work very hard for what they want and have. They have powerful earning power. They will oftentimes make purchases based on emotions, many times than on thought. They can also be very resourceful and take old things and turn them into new. And this is one of the talents and gifts they have, is the ability to take old things and turn them into new, which is one of the reasons much earlier we were saying that you see a lot of people in the arts and in the design industry that may have Libra prominent in their horoscope. The sign of Sagittarius will come up in the house of communications, which is known for its outspokenness. And there is a quick wit about the Libra personality. They love to talk. They love to travel. They say it the way it is. They're very bright and very adventurous. They like travel, and they like short as well as long trips. They make very, very, very good teachers and good people for teaching people how to do things. Very good at sales, very good at travel. You see a lot of these people in the sales industry also, especially if it's a product or an industry that not only do they believe in, but that they believe really has some type of use. And so if they really believe in it, they will, they'll sell the world on what their beliefs are. If you look at their basic early childhood experience, and of course, this may be different for different Libras, but for a good portion of the population, this may very well apply. If you look at their early home life, it may not have been as glamorous as their outer life when they become adults has become. Might have been a very conservative family. You have the sign of Capricorn at this position in the chart. The mother more than the father. Of course, times are changing. Fathers are becoming home persons and mothers are becoming people in the outer world. And actually, it's an idea whose time has come. And in fact, a little Libra child born now, this may work more appropriately for them than an adult who may be 40, 50, or 60 years of age. But if in fact they are in their 40s, 50s, or 60s and they do have Libra rising, they might have seen their mother or their primary caretaker, whomever that might have been, as really more of a non-nurturer than perhaps other people. Or they might have seen one of their parents or both of their parents as older parents or people that were more conservative or hard workers who were really not home that much, or if they were home, they were always doing something industrious and not wasting time. And as a result, a lot of the fantasy or the creative energy that the Libra innately is born with might have been squelched at some level. So what we'll see oftentimes with this group of people is the early childhood experience was maybe perhaps not as nurturing as they want to develop as they become older, as they experience in the world. Might have also seen a family who was very ambitious and very successful. The way they handle their children, the way they develop and work with their children, the way they work with creativity and romance. You can put the sign of Aquarius there, which would suggest that, generally speaking, the children they have, either the children of their bodies or the children of their minds, are bright, unique, entrepreneurial. There's a tremendous amount of creativity and a tremendous amount of what I would call forethought here. This is a very innovative placement for this group of people. They kind of see things before they're coming. They may have had in their personal romantic life, not their married or more committed relationship life, but their romantic life, a series of relationships that, shall we say, are not exactly conformist or are very different. Like people may have their experience of these people might have been very different, this type of person versus this type of person. They might have experienced extremes in terms of ages with people they might have been involved with romantically. It would suggest, too, that their children, if they do have children, have a real revolutionary spirit and that they are very progressive and that they themselves, Libra rising people, are very progressive in terms of their creativity. And if, in fact, their ideas are 20 years ahead of their time, in time, they will be discovered and those ideas will fall in the marketplace. As far as how they handle work and service and they work in a work environment, we can place the sign of Pisces here. And it's quite true. I mean, and Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac that everything has to filter through before it moves into Aries, that they may be rather disorganized. They may, at home or in the office, sort of be spacey and not clear always, and where they may lose track of time. This is oftentimes the sixth house of the horoscope is where we look at time management and time management skills. And Libra rising especially is not really notoriously good at time or time management. And part of the reason for that is that they're oftentimes busy dreaming and thinking and creating. They will like, since Pisces is the sign that rules music, to have a lot of music around them. In fact, you see a lot of these people in the music industry, or people have a lot of Libra in their charts in the music industry or in any industry that is working with sound, because their ears are very sensitive and they have a real good ability to edit what is good and what is not good. They may also be considered to be very good healers or people who are very much involved with health or the healing arts. As far as the way they deal with marriage and legal partnership, we've spoken a lot about partnership because it seems to be a main theme for this group of people. You can put the sign of Aries, the first sign of the zodiac here. They will aggressively go after partnerships. One of the first thoughts in their minds will be, I need a partner. They may attract to them very aggressive partners that are courageous, and in fact will not be happy with passive partners. They really have to have the balance of somebody who's assertive and aggressive, almost a heroic stance for both male and females. They may also attract to them partners that have a tendency to stir the pot, who argue for the sake of arguing, who play devil's advocate, who may at times be irresponsible. They may attract to them partners who have been wounded, not necessarily physically, although wounding does come in physical forms, but they might attract to them partners who not only have been wounded, but wounded emotionally and psychologically. And part of the energy of Libra is about bringing that into balance and bringing healing into the relationship. They may be very reactive about their partners or attract to them partners that are reactive. And I think this is one of the major lessons, too, for Libra, is learning how not to react to everything that is thrown at you from other people. You know, everybody has 3 big red buttons on their chest. And everybody knows, if they know you well, they know which buttons to push to get the reaction. One of the big lessons for Libra, especially Libra rising, is about how to learn how not to react when people push those red buttons. And by doing that, you learn to balance your relationships. In terms of how they handle money with other people, in terms of the ability to attract resources from other people, they have a tremendous ability to do this. They probably, I would say, are some of the world's greatest fundraisers. They can attract money-type partners. They like partners who have money. And in fact, one of the things that is perhaps a negative about this group of people is they also can be seduced by money and security. And it is something that might be one of those blind spots they need to work with. They're very sensual. They're very sexual. They like to know someone over a long time period before they really get to know them, become involved with them. They take longer sometimes to work up to a relationship, but once they're involved in the relationship, it's full board ahead. They are very fixed in the way they make payments, very fixed in the way they like to handle their budgets, very fixed in the way they want to see the books going as far as, the resources of the joint checking accounts. And in fact, if somebody comes in and changes the system, it can be very upsetting. Not necessarily so much for a Libra sun sign, but for someone who has perhaps Libra rising. As far as their philosophy and their belief systems, the way they look at education, the kind of education they've had, their education oftentimes has been varied. They make wonderful writers and teachers. They have traveled usually quite a bit. In fact, that's one of the things they truly enjoy, and they learn from traveling. The one difficulty, since we have Gemini at this position of the chart, is that they may be distracted in their education. They may go on one track, and somehow when something more appealing comes along, they'll be taken off the track. So one of the real challenges here is to stay on track with what it is they're studying. Since this ninth house is the position of the philosophy of life, and Gemini is there, they have a rather childlike, a young attitude towards life that stays with them till the end of life, which is very charming. They may also be educated in two different disciplines. Since Gemini is the sign of duality, one of the educations that they may have pursued was more of an intellectual pursuit. The other education they might have pursued would have been more of an emotional, creative pursuit. And one of the major challenges here, again, achieving balance, is putting those two things that they've learned together, which is one of the reasons writing is one of the areas that they do very well in, as well as anything with communication or written arts or sales or speaking, or coordinating a lot of people's ideas together and coming up with the right idea to make things happen. That's why marketing is another good field for people of Libra rising. 10th house is the house of career and public standing, and also how you saw your father. And this is where we look at perhaps the non-supposedly primary nurturer, the father being more of a nurturer perhaps than the mother. Cancer is the sign that rules the food business, the liquor business, the real estate business, any business that rules with security, works with security. And so you will see them lots of times, restaurant business. I see a lot of people who own restaurants and act as hosts or hostesses in restaurants who have Libra rising with Cancer at the top of the chart. The movie business, either at the acting end or the production end. They may be in the business of working with the oceans, the seas, waters. These are some of the areas they do very, very well in. Their career may have fluctuated, but in fact, it's been quite secure for them, and they seem to maintain an ability to be very successful in career. The 11th house is always the house of goals and friends. You can put the sign of Leo here, which is a lot of fun. It's very social. This is a social sign. This is a sign that likes to have fun. It likes parties. And in fact, will very much develop business not through a 9-to-5 job behind a desk, but at a social level, working with community organizations. This is where a lot of their business and a lot of their gifts come through, where they give to the community and they bring things back. The friends would be friends that are fun, friends that treat them like kings and queens, like royalty. In fact, this is definitely a group of people when they're walking down the street. A lot more people may know you than you may know them, because it is extremely social. And of course, the last point of the horoscope is always the 12th house before we begin anew. And this is the house of the spiritual treasure chest. It's also kind of the blind spot of the chart, and we can put the sign of Virgo there, which would suggest that underneath every Libra, which we mentioned earlier, is a very sensitive, not always having a high value or self-worth issue that's associated with Virgo. So there's a lot of anxiety that Libra will experience, but they won't necessarily talk about it or externalize it. They'll just have it inside. Diet seems to be a blind spot for them too. This is a group that's they're notorious dieters, and they're notorious people for getting off the diet. And so they'll go back and forth. I should be on, I shouldn't be on. They will also have an ability to edit and to take things apart and put things back together. And since Virgo has a lot to do with the intestinal system, this is part of the body that needs to be also watched, the lower tract, again, the low back, the low intestines, because if stress is coming up, this is the first part of the body that may affect them. On the opposite side of that, as we close, when we look in terms of their treasure, what they hold that's a secret treasure, if you put Virgo at this position of the chart, it would suggest that they're very good at being master craftspeople themselves. They basically underneath it, even though they may physically look so perfect that you wouldn't know it of them, underneath it, basically, they're very, very, very service-oriented. And in fact, by serving, it truly, truly opens them up and brings them into the balance that we talked about. So basically what we're saying here is that Libra is the sign of balance. Where Libra is in the horoscope is where you seek spiritual and emotional balance, where you have the opportunity to achieve true union, the balance of peace and action. And in closing, let me give you a thought. We talked about St. Michael a little earlier. There's another image of St. George and the dragon. And if you look at the image of St. George and the dragon, he's on a horse, and he has his spear holding the dragon down. A lot of people, when they look at that image, they believe that he is killing the dragon. In fact, he is not killing the dragon. He is using a forked spear, and it's around the dragon's neck. And the dragon represents raw, sexual, primal Kundalini power. And what St. George is doing is he's not killing that energy. He's just holding it down to allow the creative and spiritual energy to rise through the body and the mind. And I think this is basically when we really look at the symbology of when Libra comes in the year, when they have equal day, equal night, we're separating from nature, the world is about to die, and now we're choosing consciousness. This is really what this sign is about, is total balance between consciousness, body, mind, and spirit. And it's a very fortunate sign under which to be born, and there's a lot of gifts that it holds that it can give to the world.
Hello, this is Georgia Stathis. You've been listening to our archived series, Myths and Signs of the Zodiac, and we thank you. If you like what you heard and you'd like to know more and hear more, please go to our website at starcycles.com, where you can find an assortment of available tools, pieces of information, and things that you can use in your own practice or in your own study of astrology. Again, thank you so much, and we hope to see you soon.